The moon cast silver fingers through the blinds of the lakeside cabin, painting stripes across William Blackwood's weathered face. 70 years had etched their story into every line around his eyes, across his forehead, around his mouth. Once those lines had been from laughter and determination. Now they mapped only loss and solitude. He had been dreaming of her again. Eleanor, his wife of 45 years, gone 5 winters now. In dreams, her hands still felt warm in his. When he woke, the cold reality of empty sheets beside him was its own kind of nightmare. William shifted in his leather armchair, the ancient thing nearly as old as he was. The book that had slipped from his grasp as sleep claimed him now lay splayed on the floor. Outside, beyond the walls of his self-imposed exile, a storm was brewing. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a warning of things to come. "I was once the guardian of an empire, the protector of an entire legacy," he whispered to the empty room, his voice still carrying the weight of command despite the years. "Now I'm just an old man with memories of glory days." The cabin walls were adorned with remnants of his former life. Framed newspaper clippings from the Wall Street Journal and Fortune magazine. "Blackwood Enterprises revolutionizes energy sector." William Blackwood named Businessman of the Year. Awards gathered dust on shelves. A photograph of William shaking hands with a former president had faded with time, much like his relevance in the world he once dominated. 5 years since retirement. 5 years since he'd walked away from Blackwood Enterprises, the energy and technology conglomerate he had built from nothing into a global force. 5 years of watching his son Ethan steer the company in new directions, dismissing the traditions and secrets William had tried to impart. The old clock on the mantel ticked toward midnight as the storm drew closer. Rain began to patter against the windows softly at first, then with increasing urgency. Wind whistled through the pine trees surrounding the property, bending their ancient trunks with each powerful gust. William had chosen this isolated spot on Silver Lake in Maine deliberately, far from the corporate headquarters in Boston, far from the prying eyes of former colleagues and competitors, far from the whispers that had followed him in his final years at the helm. The old man who believes in fairy tales. The CEO who claims people touched by moonlight have special abilities. The once brilliant mind now clouded with delusions and ancient prophecies. His fingers traced the leather binding of the journal beside him. His father's journal. The truth about Blackwood Enterprises that no one wanted to believe. The reason the company had been founded in the first place nearly a century ago. "To protect those touched by the moon," William murmured. "A promise I failed to keep." Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark white light. Thunder followed immediately, a deafening crack that shook the cabin to its foundation. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging the room into darkness, save for the silver moonlight streaming through the windows. William didn't move. At his age, fumbling through darkness for flashlights seemed more dangerous than simply waiting for his eyes to adjust. Besides, there was something comforting about sitting in darkness. A reminder that some things remained beyond human control, beyond technology, beyond corporate empires. Then came the knocking. 3 sharp raps against his front door, barely audible above the storm's fury. William tensed his hand, instinctively reaching for the drawer where he kept his revolver. No one knew this location except Ethan, and his son hadn't spoken to him in months. 3 more knocks, more urgent this time. "Who's there?" William called, his voice strong despite the tension coiling in his chest. "Please," a woman's voice answered, strained and desperate. "Help us." Something in that plea bypassed his caution. William rose from his chair, joints protesting the sudden movement. He moved to the door, revolver tucked into the waistband of his pants at the small of his back, hidden beneath his sweater. When he pulled open the door, the sight before him stole his breath. A young woman stood on his porch, drenched from the rain, white hair plastered to her pale face. But it wasn't just the unusual coloring that caught his attention. It was her eyes, pink irises almost luminous in the darkness. And in her arms, she clutched a small child, limp and feverish face flushed with unnatural heat. "Please," the woman repeated, her voice cracking. "The girl is dying. I have nowhere else to go." William's mind raced. A woman with alabaster skin, snow-white hair, and rose-colored eyes appearing on his doorstep during a storm. After all these years of searching, of waiting, one of the moonlight touched had found him instead. "How did you find me?" he demanded, not yet moving aside. The child... The woman nodded to the small form in her arms. Before she fell unconscious, she said, "We needed to find the man by the lake, the one who understands what I am." The girl whimpered a pitiful sound that cut through William's suspicion. Whatever game fate was playing, a child's suffering couldn't be ignored. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. "Quickly." As the strange woman crossed his threshold, William felt something shift in the atmosphere. A current of energy, subtle but undeniable. The sensation he hadn't felt in decades, not since his father had introduced him to the last of the Moonlight touched before they disappeared from Blackwood's protection. The prophecy whispered in his mind, "When the moon walks in human form, two realms will unite under winter's crown." William Blackwood, pragmatic businessman and reluctant heir to ancient knowledge, found himself face to face with living folklore. The question was whether this encounter heralded salvation or destruction. Time would tell. But first, a child needed saving. The woman moved with surprising grace despite her burden, following William's gesture toward the couch. She laid the small girl down gently, brushing wet hair from the child's forehead with tender concern. "I'm Lyra," she said without looking up. "Lyra Morgan. This is Sophie." William moved to the fireplace, using a long match to light the kindling he'd prepared earlier. As flames began to catch, warm light gradually filled the room, illuminating the strange tableau in his normally solitary sanctuary. "William Blackwood," he responded, studying them both in the growing firelight. "Though something tells me you already knew that." The girl on the couch couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Dark hair, olive skin, now flushed with fever, her small body trembling, despite the blanket Lyra had tucked around her. Nothing about her appearance suggested a connection to the woman who had brought her here. "She's not mine," Lyra said, correctly reading his assessment. "Her parents were murdered 3 days ago. I found her hiding in a closet when I came to deliver herbs to their home." William moved to the kitchen, retrieving his emergency medical kit and a bottle of water. "What's wrong with her?" "Besides the fever, trauma, dehydration, and something else I can't identify." Lyra's pale hands smoothed the blanket with practiced care. "I've tried every remedy I know. Nothing breaks the fever." William knelt beside the couch, his old knees protesting. He placed a hand on the child's forehead, feeling heat radiating from her skin. Too hot. Dangerously hot. He opened his kit, removing a digital thermometer and placing it gently in the girl's ear. When it beeped, the reading confirmed his fears. 104.3. "We need to cool her down immediately," he said, slipping into the authoritative tone that had once commanded boardrooms. "In the bathroom under the sink there are clean washcloths. Soak them in cold water. My bedroom is through that door. In the bottom drawer of the dresser you'll find some children's medicine. My granddaughter visits occasionally." Lyra nodded once and moved to follow his instructions. While she was gone, William carefully examined the child, looking for any signs of injury or infection that might explain the dangerous fever. Nothing obvious presented itself. The girl's eyes fluttered open, briefly unfocused and glazed. "The bad man," she whispered, the words barely audible. "The bad man with the silver wolf pin." William froze, a chill that had nothing to do with the storm running down his spine. A silver wolf pin, the emblem of James Carson, his former business partner and rival. The man who had tried to expose and exploit the Moonlight touched for personal gain. Lyra returned with the washcloths and medicine, her unusual eyes noting his sudden tension. "What is it?" "Later," William said, taking the supplies from her. Together they worked to bring down Sophie's fever, placing cool cloths on her forehead, wrists, and the back of her neck. William measured the children's fever reducer, carefully supporting the girl's head as Lyra helped her swallow the medicine. Throughout their ministrations, William observed Lyra closely. She moved with the confident precision of someone trained in healing arts. More importantly, he noticed how her pale hands lingered on Sophie's pulse points longer than necessary, and how the child seemed to breathe easier after each touch. "You can see it, can't you?" he asked quietly, once Sophie had fallen into a more peaceful sleep. The energy flowing through her body. Lyra's hands stilled. Her unusual eyes lifted to his face, wariness replacing the focus that had been there before. "I don't know what you mean," she said carefully. William gestured to where her fingertips still rested lightly on Sophie's wrist. "The way you track her life force. The way your touch eases her breathing. These aren't common skills, Ms. Morgan." A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling fire and the storm's continuing assault outside. Finally, Lyra sighed, her shoulders dropping slightly. "How do you know about people like me?" she asked. William rose slowly, his joints complaining at having been in one position too long. He moved to the bookshelf near his desk and removed a false panel revealing a hidden safe. With practiced movements, he entered the combination and withdrew a leather-bound volume that appeared even older than he was. Because protecting people like you has been my family's mission for 3 generations, he said, returning to sit in the armchair opposite the couch. Though I'm afraid we haven't done a very good job of it in recent years. He opened the book, revealing pages of handwritten notes, diagrams, and photographs dating back nearly a century. He turned to a specific page and handed the open book to Lyra. She accepted it with visible hesitation, then gasped at what she saw. The page showed a photograph from the 1920s. In it, a group of people with the same distinctive features as Lyra stood around a distinguished-looking man in a business suit. William's grandfather, Harold Blackwood, founder of what would eventually become Blackwood Enterprises. The Moonlight touched, William said softly. That's what my grandfather called them. People born with alabaster skin hair like freshly fallen snow and the ability to perceive and manipulate life energy. My grandfather believed your kind were blessed by the moon itself, given gifts beyond ordinary human capacity. Lyra traced the faces in the photograph with a trembling finger. I thought I was alone, she whispered. A freak, a mistake of nature. Far from it, William replied, though your numbers have dwindled over the decades. The last one I personally met was nearly 30 years ago. What happened to them? William's face darkened. Some lived out their lives in peace under Blackwood protection. Others chose to leave to hide themselves in the world. And some were discovered by those who would exploit their abilities. Lyra closed the book carefully. Like the man with the silver wolf pin. William nodded grimly. James Carson, once my business partner at Blackwood Enterprises. When he discovered the true purpose behind our company, he became obsessed with the potential of the Moonlight touched. Not for protection, but for profit. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the cabin, rain lashing against the windows like liquid bullets. Inside, the fire popped and hissed, casting long shadows across the room. I don't understand, Lyra said, looking from the book to William and back. Why would a major corporation concern itself with protecting people like me? What could you possibly gain? William smiled sadly. Not everything is about profit, Ms. Morgan, despite what the business world might suggest. My grandfather founded Blackwood Enterprises with money from the timber industry, but its true purpose was always to create a safe haven for the Moonlight touched. Why be I? Because his wife, my grandmother, was one of you. William nodded toward the mantelpiece where a silver-framed photograph stood, a beautiful woman with striking white hair and a gentle smile. Elizabeth Blackwood. She saved his life during the influenza pandemic of 1918, using abilities very similar to what I've observed in you. In gratitude and later love, he dedicated his fortune to protecting others, like her. Lyra's attention returned to Sophie, whose breathing had grown steadier, the flush of fever beginning to fade from her cheeks. And this Carson, he's the one who killed Sophie's parents. I can't be certain without knowing who they were, William said cautiously. But if the child mentioned a man with a silver wolf pin, it seems likely. Carson broke away from Blackwood 15 years ago to form his own company, Lupine Technologies. The silver wolf is their corporate symbol. They were researchers, Lyra said quietly, adjusting the cool cloth on Sophie's forehead. Dr. Allen and Mira Teller. They lived near my cottage in Silverpine. I provided them with medicinal herbs for their work. They never told me exactly what they researched, but I gathered it involved genetic anomalies. William straightened in his chair. The Tellers, they were contracted by Blackwood Enterprises 5 years ago, just before my retirement. They were investigating genetic markers in the Moonlight touched. Why would they do that? To help find and protect those like you, William explained. Your numbers have been declining for generations. The Tellers were developing a way to identify Moonlight-touched individuals early in life before their abilities manifested fully. The goal was to offer protection before they became targets. Lyra's expression darkened. Well, they became targets anyway. 3 nights ago, men broke into their home. I heard the commotion from my cottage nearby and went to investigate, but I was too late for the Tellers. I found Sophie hiding in a closet, clutching a USB drive and whimpering about the bad man with the wolf pin. A USB drive. William's voice sharpened with sudden interest. What was on it? I don't know. My computer died years ago. I never replaced it. William processed this information, connecting dots that had eluded him for years. If Carson had murdered the tellers, it meant they had discovered something dangerous, something worth killing for. Sophie stirred on the couch, her small face contorting in distress even in sleep. Lyra immediately placed her pale hand on the child's forehead, and William watched in fascination as a subtle glow seemed to emanate from her fingertips. Within moments, Sophie's expression relaxed, her breathing once again steady and even. "How long have you known you could do that?" William asked. Lyra didn't remove her hand from Sophie's forehead. "Since I was a child. The woman who raised me, Grace, she recognized what I was and taught me to use my abilities for healing. She called it energy manipulation, though she warned me never to show others." "Grace was wise," William said. "The world has never been kind to those who are different, especially those whose differences might be valuable to powerful interests. Is that why they want us? These abilities." William nodded solemnly. "The healing touch alone would revolutionize medicine. But from what my grandfather documented, the Moonlight touched possess even greater capabilities. Energy transference, accelerated cell regeneration. Some even demonstrated limited precognitive abilities. Imagine what governments or corporations would pay for such talents." Lyra withdrew her hand from Sophie's forehead, her unusual eyes meeting William's with unexpected intensity. "Is that why you are helping us? For these supposed greater abilities I might develop?" William felt the question like a physical blow. The suspicion was justified but painful nonetheless. After a lifetime in business, was this how people saw him? A calculating opportunist. "I'm helping you because it's the right thing to do," he said firmly. "Because my family made a promise 3 generations ago. And because I've spent the past 5 years watching that promise crumble under my son's leadership." The mention of his son brought a fresh wave of regret. Ethan had never believed the family stories about the Moonlight touched, had dismissed them as the fanciful tales of a man losing his grip on reality. The final argument before William's retirement had been about the continued funding of the sanctuary, the secret facility where Blackwood had once sheltered those with Lyra's gifts. "Your son leads Blackwood now," Lyra asked. "Ethan became CEO when I retired. He's brilliant with technology and business strategy, but he lacks faith in things he can't immediately quantify. He considers the Moonlight touched a fairy tale I created to explain away unauthorized corporate expenditures. Then he won't help us." William sighed, feeling every one of his 70 years pressing down on him. "Ethan will need convincing. But if Carson killed the tellers and is hunting you and Sophie, we'll need Blackwood resources to keep you safe." A soft whimper from the couch interrupted their conversation. Sophie's eyes fluttered open clearer now, the fever having broken. Her gaze darted around the unfamiliar surroundings before settling on Lyra with visible relief. "The Moon Lady," she whispered, reaching for Lyra's hand. "You found her." Lyra smiled, squeezing the child's small fingers. "Yes, little one, and we found someone who can help us." Sophie's attention shifted to William, studying him with the frank curiosity only children can muster. "Are you the lake man?" William moved from his chair to kneel beside the couch, ignoring his protesting knees. "I suppose I am. My name is William. Can you tell us what happened to your parents, Sophie?" Tears welled in the child's eyes, but she nodded bravely. "The bad men came. Daddy told me to hide in the special closet, not to come out no matter what I heard." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I heard Mommy screaming." William and Lyra exchanged a pained glance over the child's head. "The man with the wolf pins," William prompted gently. "Did you see him?" Sophie nodded. "He talked to Daddy before the loud noises. He wanted the special research. Daddy said he'd never give it to him because he was using it wrong." "Do you know what the special research was?" Lyra asked. "About special people. People like you, Moon Lady." Sophie looked at Lyra with innocent admiration. "Daddy said there used to be more people like you, but something bad was happening to make there be fewer babies born special." William felt a chill run through him. Declining birth rates among the Moonlight touched had been documented for generations, but the cause had remained elusive. "Had the tellers discovered the reason, Sophie," he said carefully, "your father gave you something to keep safe, didn't he? A small stick that goes into computers?" The child nodded. "The truth stick. He said it would tell the truth about the bad man. Her small face crumpled. But I lost it when we were running from the bad men in the woods. Lyra stroked the girl's hair. You didn't lose it, Sophie. I have it safe. You were holding it when I found you. Relief flooded William's mind. If they had the teller's research, they might finally understand what Carson was planning and why he was hunting the Moonlight touched. We need to see what's on that drive, he said, rising to his feet, and we need to contact my son. Whatever your parents discovered, Sophie, it cost them their lives, which means it's valuable enough for Carson to keep hunting you. As if in response to his words, headlights swept across the cabin windows. A vehicle was coming up the long driveway, moving slowly through the storm. William moved quickly to the window, staying to one side to remain unseen. A large black SUV with tinted windows was approaching, its headlights cutting through the rain like twin searchlights. How did they find us? Lyra whispered, gathering Sophie protectively in her arms. We need to leave, now. William moved with surprising speed for a man his age, grabbing a go-bag from a closet by the door. There's a service road behind the cabin. My truck is in the garage. Take Sophie and go through the back door. I'll delay them. Lyra stood, Sophie clutched to her chest. I won't leave you to face them alone. William removed the revolver from his waistband. I've been dealing with Carson and his kind for decades. Trust me, Ms. Morgan, I can handle myself. The determination in Lyra's unusual eyes surprised him. This wasn't a frightened young woman running from danger. This was someone who had faced adversity her entire life and refused to bend. We stay together, she said firmly. You know about my kind. You know about the people hunting us. We need you. The headlights outside grew brighter as the vehicle approached the cabin. William knew they had seconds, not minutes, to decide. Fine, he conceded. Together. But we move now. As they hurried toward the back door, Sophie clutched tightly in Lyra's arms. William found himself calculating odds and resources. He would need to contact Ethan, convince his skeptical son that the fairy tales were real. He would need to access the old sanctuary facility if it still existed. And somehow he would need to protect this strange young woman and the orphan child who had appeared on his doorstep in the middle of a storm. The prophecy echoed in his mind once more. When the moon walks in human form, two realms will unite under winter's crown. For the first time in years, William Blackwood felt truly alive. The mission that had defined his family for generations had found him again, even in his self-imposed exile. The question now was whether an old man, a marked woman, and a traumatized child could stand against the resources of a man like James Carson. As they slipped out the back door into the storm, William knew the answer would determine not just their fates, but the future of the Moonlight touched themselves. The game had begun again, and this time failure was not an option. The story follows William Blackwood, a 70-year-old retired CEO living in isolation by Silver Lake in Maine. Once the powerful head of Blackwood Enterprises, he now spends his days alone, haunted by memories of his late wife Eleanor and the family legacy he failed to protect. During a violent storm, William is startled by a desperate knocking at his door. He finds Lyra Morgan, a young woman with alabaster skin, white hair, and pink eyes, traits of the Moonlight touched, holding a feverish child named Sophie. William immediately recognizes Lyra as one of the special people his family has protected for generations. As they work together to save Sophie, William reveals that Blackwood Enterprises was founded to protect people like Lyra, who possess healing abilities and energy manipulation. He explains that his grandmother was Moonlight touched, inspiring his grandfather to create a sanctuary for others like her. Sophie regains consciousness and reveals that her parents, the tellers, researchers investigating genetic markers in Moonlight touched individuals, were murdered by the bad man with the silver wolf pin. William recognizes this as James Carson, his former business partner, who broke away to form Lupine Technologies and wants to exploit the Moonlight touched for profit. William learns that Sophie possesses a USB drive with her parents' research potentially containing crucial information about why Moonlight touched births are declining and what Carson is planning. Before they can examine it, headlights appear outside the cabin. Carson's men have found them. The rain pelted their faces as William led Lyra and Sophie through the darkness behind his cabin. Water soaked through his clothes, plastering his gray hair to his forehead, but the chill barely registered. Decades of corporate battles had taught him to compartmentalize discomfort when survival was at stake. This way, he whispered, guiding them toward a weathered shed nearly invisible among the pines. Behind them, flashlight beams cut through the rain as men exited the black SUV, their shouted commands carrying over the storm. William knew they had minutes at most before Carson's men discovered the back exit. The shed door creaked as William pulled it open. Inside was not garden equipment, but a rugged off-road vehicle somewhere between a Jeep and an ATV covered with a tarp. He yanked the covering away, revealing a vehicle built for exactly this purpose: escape. "Get in," he instructed, helping Lyra with Sophie. "The keys are in the ignition." "You planned for this," Lyra observed as she settled Sophie in the back seat. "I've been hunted before," William replied, simply sliding behind the wheel. "Corporate raiders or Carson's mercenaries, the tactics aren't so different." The vehicle roared to life with a twist of the key. William pressed a button on the dashboard, and the rear wall of the shed slid open, revealing a narrow trail cutting through the dense forest behind his property. "Hold tight," he warned, then gunned the engine. They shot forward into the darkness, headlights off, William navigating by memory and the occasional flash of lightning. The specialized tires gripped the mud as they bounced along the rough trail, putting distance between themselves and their pursuers. Sophie whimpered with each jolt, her small face buried against Lyra's chest. The young woman held the child tightly, her alabaster skin almost luminescent even in the darkness. William caught glimpses of her in his rearview mirror, marveling at how her presence seemed to gather what little light existed in the stormy night. "Where are we going?" Lyra called over the engine's roar. "Somewhere Carson won't expect," William answered, focusing on the treacherous path ahead. "I need to contact my son." Lyra's expression tightened. "The son who thinks people like me are fairy tales." "The same," William confirmed grimly, "but he controls resources we need whether he believes or not." 20 minutes of brutal off-road driving brought them to a small clearing where a humble cabin stood, even more weathered than William's lakeside retreat. He killed the engine and listened, hearing only the continuing storm. "A hunting cabin," he explained, leading them toward the shelter. "Registered to a shell corporation, 3 times removed from my name. Only my most trusted lawyer knows about it." Inside was sparse but functional: a fireplace, basic furniture, a pantry stocked with non-perishables, and most importantly, a satellite phone that wouldn't be easily traced. While Lyra settled Sophie by the fireplace, wrapping the exhausted child in a rough wool blanket, William dialed a number from memory. It rang 5 times before a sleep-roughened voice answered. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" "Hello, Ethan," William said, his tone more formal than a father speaking to his son. "We have a situation." A long pause followed. When Ethan spoke again, wariness had replaced irritation. "Dad, what's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," William assured him, "but I have 2 people with me who aren't. One of them is a child whose parents were murdered by James Carson." "Carson," the name triggered immediate alertness in Ethan's voice. "What does he have to do with anything?" "Remember the Teller research project, the genetic study we commissioned before my retirement?" "Vaguely," Ethan replied cautiously. "Something about rare genetic markers. You insisted on continuing funding even though the results were inconclusive." William took a deep breath. "The Tellers are dead. Carson had them killed 3 days ago. Their daughter survived, and she's with me now, along with one of the subjects they were studying." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. When Ethan finally spoke, his voice had hardened. "Dad, if you're having an episode again, this isn't funny. I can send someone to check on you, but I'm not playing along with these delusions." William closed his eyes, fighting back the familiar frustration. 5 years of this. 5 years of his own son dismissing decades of family history as the ravings of a deteriorating mind. "Ethan, I need you to listen very carefully," he said, each word measured and precise. "Carson's men just raided my cabin. They are hunting us. People will die if you don't help." "If you're really in danger, call the police," Ethan replied. "I'm not sending Blackwood security for another wild goose chase about people with magical powers." "They're not magical," William snapped, patience fraying. "They're genetic variations with specific abilities. Abilities your own company has been researching for decades, whether you choose to believe it or not." A soft touch on his arm made William turn. Lyra stood beside him, her unusual eyes focused on the satellite phone. She extended her hand, a silent request to speak. With reluctance, William passed her the phone. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice clear and steady. "My name is Lyra Morgan. I understand your skepticism. I've lived with it my entire life. But right now, a 7-year-old girl is traumatized and exhausted because men murdered her parents and are hunting her for research they conducted for your company. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. I don't care if you believe I'm special or magical or whatever term your father uses. But if you have any decency at all, you'll help protect a child whose only crime was being born to scientists who worked for you. William watched as Lyra handed the phone back, impressed by her directness. The silence from the other end stretched long enough that William wondered if Ethan had hung up. Finally, his son spoke. "Where are you?" William exhaled slowly. "The McIntyre hunting property." "Stay put. I'll have a team there in 3 hours." A pause. "And Dad, don't call anyone else. Not even Marcus." The line went dead. William placed the satellite phone on the rough wooden table, considering his son's warning. Marcus Delaney had been William's head of security for 20 years, a man he trusted implicitly. For Ethan to warn against contacting him suggested complications William wasn't aware of. "Your son is coming," Lyra asked, returning to check on Sophie. "He's sending people," William clarified. "Whether that includes himself remains to be seen." William moved to the fireplace, carefully building a small fire to ward off the chill. As the flames caught, casting warm light through the Spartan cabin, he studied the young woman and child more carefully. Lyra appeared to be in her mid-20s, though her unusual coloration made age difficult to determine. Her movements were graceful but tentative, as if she'd spent a lifetime trying to avoid notice. Sophie, by contrast, was an ordinary-looking child with olive skin and dark curls, nothing to mark her as special, save the haunted look in her eyes that no 7-year-old should possess. "How did you become involved with the tellers?" William asked, settling into a chair across from Lyra. She adjusted the blanket around the now sleeping Sophie before answering. "I live in a cottage at the edge of Silver Pine. The locals avoid me much like they avoided Grace before me." "Grace was your guardian," Lyra nodded. "She found me abandoned as an infant at the edge of her garden. My birth parents left a note calling me cursed, touched by the moon's sickness." A bitter smile touched her lips. "Grace recognized what I was and raised me to use my differences as strengths rather than curses. She taught you healing. She taught me everything. Herbal medicine, energy, sensing how to survive in a world that fears difference." Lyra's pale fingers traced patterns on the rough blanket. "The tellers moved to Silver Pine 3 years ago. They came to Grace for local herbs, and when she died last winter, they continued to visit me. They were different from the villagers. They looked at me with curiosity instead of fear." William nodded, understanding dawning. "They recognized your genetic markers. That's why they contacted you." "They never said as much, but yes, I believe so. Dr. Mira would sometimes ask to take blood samples, hair samples. They explained it was for research that could help people like me." Lyra's eyes darkened. "I trusted them." "The tellers were good people," William assured her. "If they were taking samples, it was for the research Blackwood commissioned, finding genetic markers that could identify the Moonlight touched early in life." "To what end?" Lyra challenged. "So your company could collect us, study us like lab specimens." William shook his head firmly. "To protect you. The Moonlight touched have been disappearing for generations. Fewer births, unexplained deaths. My father documented over 200 individuals in the 1950s. By the time I took over Blackwood in the 1980s, we could locate fewer than 50 worldwide." Well, Lyra's eyes widened. "50? There are others alive right now." "There were when I retired," William confirmed, "though I lost track after Ethan dismantled our protection programs." A log shifted in the fireplace, sending sparks dancing upward. Outside, the storm continued its assault rain, hammering against the cabin's tin roof like impatient fingers. "If Carson killed the tellers for their research," Lyra said slowly, "then whatever they discovered must be significant." William nodded. "The USB drive Sophie was carrying may contain answers, but we need a computer. Your son will bring one. If he's thinking clearly, yes." William sighed, feeling the weight of the years pressing down on him. "Ethan is brilliant, but he's spent 5 years systematically dismantling everything I built to protect your kind. Convincing him of the truth won't be easy." "You don't need to convince me of anything, Dad." The new voice startled them both. William turned to find his son standing in the doorway, rain dripping from his expensive coat. Behind him, two men in tactical gear secured the perimeter of the cabin, their movements professional and precise. Ethan Blackwood was 40 with the same strong jawline as his father, but darker hair and colder eyes. Where William carried himself with the weathered dignity of age, Ethan radiated the sharp intensity of someone who commanded respect through intimidation rather than wisdom. "You made good time," William observed, hiding his surprise at his son's presence. Ethan stepped fully into the cabin, assessing the situation with a calculating gaze. "I had the company helicopter standing by. Storms don't ground everything these days." His attention settled on Lyra and Sophie. For a moment, William saw something flicker in his son's eyes. Not belief exactly, but perhaps a crack in the armor of skepticism. "So this is your Moonlight touched," Ethan said, studying Lyra with scientific detachment. "I'm not his anything," Lyra replied evenly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "My name is Lyra Morgan." A ghost of a smile touched Ethan's lips. "Direct, I appreciate that." He turned his attention to the sleeping child. "And this is Sophie Teller, Alan, and Mira's daughter." William nodded. "Her parents were murdered 3 days ago, Carson's men." "So you claim." Ethan removed his wet coat, hanging it by the door. "What evidence do you have that Carson was involved?" "Sophie saw a man with a silver wolf pin," William explained, "Carson's signature, and his men just raided my cabin." "The men at your cabin could have been common burglars," Ethan countered, "and a child's testimony after trauma is hardly reliable." William felt his patience wearing thin. "Damn it, Ethan. I've been dealing with Carson longer than you've been alive. I know his methods." One of the security men entered, interrupting the brewing argument. "Sir, we've secured the perimeter. No signs of pursuit, but the storm makes it hard to be certain." Ethan nodded dismissal. Once they were alone again, he extracted a slim laptop from his bag and placed it on the table. "I've spent the helicopter ride reviewing the Teller research files," he said, opening the computer. "Fascinating work, though largely theoretical. Nothing worth killing for." "They may have had breakthrough results they hadn't shared yet," William suggested. "That's why Sophie's USB drive is so important." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What USB drive?" Lyra reached into her pocket, producing a small black drive. "This." Sophie was clutching it when I found her. Her father had given it to her for safekeeping. Ethan extended his hand for the device, but Lyra hesitated, looking to William. "It's okay," William assured her. "Whatever's on there, we need to know." Reluctantly, Lyra handed over the drive. Ethan inserted it into his laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard as he navigated through encryption layers. "Military-grade security," he muttered, sounding grudgingly impressed. The tellers weren't taking chances. William moved to look over his son's shoulder, noting the complex algorithms flashing across the screen. "Can you break it?" "Already done," Ethan replied, a hint of professional pride in his voice. The password was Sophie's birth date combined with her mother's maiden name. Sophisticated encryption, sentimental password. The eternal contradiction of brilliant minds. The screen filled with files and folders, most labeled with alphanumeric codes rather than descriptive names. Ethan opened one at random, revealing dense scientific data and genetic sequences. "This will take time to analyze properly," he said, scanning the information. "But at first glance, it appears the tellers were mapping genetic markers associated with energy manipulation abilities." "The healing touch," William murmured. Ethan continued exploring the files, his expression growing more troubled with each discovery. "There's more. They found evidence of deliberate genetic tampering. Someone has been introducing a synthetic compound that targets specific genetic sequences." "Targeting how?" Lyra asked, moving closer despite her wariness of Ethan. Ethan opened another file, this one containing charts showing declining population trends. "According to this, the compound inhibits fertility in individuals carrying these specific genetic markers. It's been introduced into water supplies in targeted regions over decades." William felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "Carson has been sterilizing the Moonlight touched." "Not just Carson," Ethan said grimly. "These operations date back to the 1970s, long before Carson broke away from Blackwood." The implication hung in the air like a physical presence. William shook his head in denial. "Impossible. My father would never have authorized such a thing." "Perhaps not knowingly," Ethan conceded, "but according to these records, the program operated under Blackwood Enterprises' biomedical division for nearly 30 years. Lyra's voice was tight with controlled anger. "You've been exterminating us." "Not us," William insisted. "This would have been done without family knowledge. Someone inside the company working against our protection mandate." Ethan continued examining files. "There's more. The tellers discovered the compound doesn't just affect fertility. With repeated exposure, it weakens the Moonlight touched physically, making them more susceptible to illness." "Grace," Lyra whispered. "She was always so strong, then wasted away so quickly." "The final stage of the compound's effect," Ethan confirmed, reading from the screen. "Accelerated cellular deterioration, particularly in individuals over 50, carrying the markers." William paced the small cabin, minds racing. "This explains everything. The declining birth rates. Oh, the mysterious illness. Someone has been conducting slow genocide against the Moonlight touched for decades. And now Carson has the formula," Ethan added, pointing to a recent access log on one of the files. "According to this, someone downloaded the compound specifications 3 days ago, hours before the tellers were killed." A small sound from the couch drew their attention. Sophie had awakened, her eyes wide with fear as she took in the unfamiliar faces. "It's okay, little one," Lyra soothed, returning to the child's side. "These people are here to help us." Sophie's gaze fixed on Ethan, studying him with the directness only children possess. "You look like the lake man," she observed. Despite the tension, a faint smile touched Ethan's lips. "He's my father." Sophie nodded as if this explained everything. "Daddy said the lake man would know what to do with the truth stick." Ethan glanced at the USB drive still in his computer. "Your father was very brave, Sophie. He discovered something important." "The bad men didn't want him to tell," Sophie whispered. "No, they didn't." Ethan agreed, his tone gentler than William had heard in years. "But we're going to make sure everyone knows now." The security man returned, his expression urgent. "Sir, we've got incoming vehicles, multiple signatures approaching fast." Ethan closed the laptop, securing the USB drive in his pocket. "How many, Quim?" "At least 3 SUVs. They'll be here in under 5 minutes." William moved to the window, peering through the rain. In the distance, headlights cut through the darkness, approaching along the narrow access road. "Carson moves quickly," he muttered. "How did he find us so fast?" Ethan's expression hardened. "We have a traitor in our organization. I've suspected it for months, but couldn't identify who." "Your warning about Marcus," William realized. "You think he's working for Carson?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted, "but someone with high-level access has been feeding information to Lupine Technologies. Security protocols, research data, personnel movements." The security man interrupted again. "Sir, we need to move now. The chopper is 3 minutes out, but we need to reach the extraction point." Ethan nodded. "Get the girl," he instructed Lyra. "We're leaving." As they prepared to depart, the cabin windows suddenly exploded inward, showering them with glass. Outside, blinding spotlights illuminated the clearing, and a voice boomed through a megaphone. "William Blackwood, we have the building surrounded. Send out the woman and the child, and you may leave unharmed." William recognized the voice immediately. James Carson himself had come to claim his prizes. "Options?" he asked Ethan. His son was already issuing quiet commands to his security team through a discreet earpiece. "The chopper will create a diversion. When I give the signal, we make for the trees to the north. There's a ravine that will provide cover." Lyra had gathered Sophie in her arms, the child's face buried against her shoulder. "What if they catch us?" "They won't," William assured her, though the confidence in his voice exceeded his actual certainty. The helicopter appeared overhead, its rotors cutting through the storm with a thunderous roar. As planned, it drew gunfire from Carson's men, creating momentary chaos. "Now," Ethan commanded. They burst from the rear of the cabin, racing for the tree line. William felt the years fall away as adrenaline coursed through his system. Behind them, shouts and gunfire punctuated the storm's fury. Ahead, the promise of temporary safety in the dense forest. They had almost reached the trees when the first bullet struck the ground near William's feet. The second caught one of Ethan's security men in the shoulder, spinning him around with a cry of pain. Lyra stumbled, nearly dropping Sophie as she tried to help the wounded man. Without hesitation, Ethan scooped up the child, freeing Lyra to assist the fallen guard. What happened next would forever change William's understanding of the Moonlight touched. Lyra placed her pale hands on the wounded man's shoulder. Even through the rain and darkness, William could see the luminous energy that emanated from her fingertips. The security guard's expression shifted from pain to astonishment as the bullet wound visibly closed beneath Lyra's touch. "Run," she commanded, helping the man to his feet. Now, they reached the forest's edge as another volley of bullets peppered the ground around them. Ethan, carrying Sophie, took the lead, guiding them down a steep embankment toward the promised ravine. William glanced back once. Carson's men were giving chase, but the storm and darkness hampered their progress. More significantly, several had stopped to examine the spot where Lyra had healed the wounded guard, their flashlights illuminating the blood-stained ground where no body lay. They had witnessed her ability. Now the hunt would intensify. The ravine provided temporary shelter, a natural channel cut through the forest by centuries of water flow. Now it ran thick with mud and debris from the storm, but its steep sides offered concealment from pursuers. "The chopper will meet us 2 miles downstream," Ethan explained between labored breaths. "We follow the ravine until it widens near the old logging road." William nodded, conserving his breath for the difficult trek. Despite his relatively good condition for a 70-year-old man, the physical demands of their escape were taking a toll. Each step through the ankle-deep mud required conscious effort. Lyra moved to his side, offering silent support with a hand on his elbow. Her touch conveyed more than physical assistance. William felt energy flowing into his tired muscles, renewing his strength. "Save your power," he advised quietly. "You may need it more urgently later." "I have enough to share," she replied, her pale features determined in the darkness. They continued in silence for nearly 30 minutes, the sounds of pursuit growing more distant behind them. Sophie had fallen into exhausted sleep in Ethan's arms, her small face peaceful despite the chaos surrounding them. Finally, the ravine widened, as promised, opening onto a small clearing where the helicopter waited, rotors turning at minimum speed to maintain readiness. As they approached, William felt Lyra stiffen beside him. "Something's wrong," she whispered, her eyes scanning the helicopter and surrounding area. Ethan had noticed too. He signaled his remaining security man to halt, then passed the sleeping Sophie to him. "Stay here," he instructed William and Lyra. "I'll check it out." "Ethan, wait," William began, but his son was already moving forward, his posture alert for any threat. The helicopter pilot spotted him and flashed a recognition signal. Ethan returned it and continued his approach. He was halfway across the clearing when the pilot's head snapped back suddenly, a dark spray visible even from a distance. "Sniper!" William hissed, pulling Lyra back into the cover of the ravine. "Ethan, get back here!" But his son had already changed direction, racing not back toward them, but toward a fallen log at the edge of the clearing. He dove behind it seconds before bullets tore into the ground where he had been standing. The security man had taken position at the mouth of the ravine, his weapon drawn as he scanned for the shooter. Sophie stirred in his arms, wakened by the commotion. "We're pinned down," the guard assessed grimly. "They've got the high ground in the chopper." William felt the familiar weight of leadership settling on his shoulders. Years in the corporate world had taught him that the most dangerous moment in any crisis was the paralysis that followed initial shock. "Options," he demanded, his voice carrying the authority that had once commanded a global enterprise. "Limited," the guard admitted. "We can retreat back up the ravine, but they'll have anticipated that. We can try to circle around through the forest, but with the child and in this weather—" William nodded, understanding. Neither option promised success. "What about Ethan?" Lyra asked, her eyes fixed on the log where he had taken cover. "He's trained for this," the guard assured her. William Blackwood insisted his son learn tactical survival skills from an early age. A bitter smile touched William's lips. "Paranoid old man's precautions. Not so useless now, are they?" A flicker of movement caught their attention. Ethan was signaling them from his position, a series of hand gestures that his father immediately recognized from the lessons he had indeed insisted upon decades ago. "He's creating a diversion," William translated. "When he draws their fire, we move along the tree line to the east, staying in cover." "And him?" Lyra questioned. "He'll join us if he can." The starkness of those words hung in the air. If he can. The unspoken possibility that Ethan might sacrifice himself to save them was not lost on anyone. Before they could implement the plan, Sophie squirmed free from the guard's arms. "I can help," she insisted, her small face determined. "I know where the bad men are." William knelt to her level, intrigued despite the urgency of their situation. "How do you know, Sophie?" "I see them," she said, simply pointing to her eyes. "Like Mommy taught me. I can see people's lights." William and Lyra exchanged startled glances. The teller's research, William realized. They were studying their own daughter. Sophie, Lyra said gently, you can see where the bad men are hiding right now. The child nodded solemnly. 3 up in the trees, 1 by the flying machine, 2 coming through the water behind us. The security guard spun around, his weapon raised toward the ravine behind them. Sure enough, splashing sounds confirmed Sophie's warning. 2 of Carson's men were wading through the muddy channel, weapons raised. The guard fired twice. Both men fell. My God, William breathed, looking at Sophie with new understanding. She's a spotter. More than that, Lyra said. She's second-generation Moonlight touched. Her mother must have carried recessive markers. This revelation would have to wait. Ethan's diversion began with a sudden explosion near the helicopter, a flashbang grenade that temporarily blinded the sniper in the trees. Taking advantage of the confusion, they moved as planned, hugging the eastern tree line while staying low. They had nearly reached the rendezvous point when a shot rang out. The security guard stumbled, a red stain blossoming on his chest. He fell forward into the mud, his weapon clattering away. Lyra immediately dropped to his side, her hands moving to the wound. But even in the darkness, William could see this injury was far more serious than the shoulder wound she had healed earlier. I can't, she whispered, anguish in her voice, as the man's life slipped away beneath her fingers. It's too deep, too much damage. William pulled her away gently. You can't save everyone. We need to keep moving. Sophie stood frozen, her small face a mask of terror as she stared at the dead man. William scooped her up without hesitation, knowing they had seconds, not minutes, before Carson's men closed in. They pressed on, reaching a rocky outcropping that provided momentary shelter. William's breath came in ragged gasps, his heart hammering against his ribs. 70 years had never felt so heavy. Ethan, he panted, scanning the darkness for any sign of his son. We need to find Ethan. He's coming, Sophie said with childlike certainty, pointing to the west. His light is bright, but hurt. Moments later, Ethan appeared, limping badly with a makeshift tourniquet around his thigh. Blood soaked his pant leg, but his expression remained grimly determined. Carson's men are everywhere, he reported, collapsing against the rocks beside them. They knew exactly where the extraction point would be. The traitor, William concluded. Someone with access to your security protocols. Ethan nodded, wincing as he adjusted his wounded leg. We need a new plan. The chopper's compromised, and they're blocking access to the logging road. William felt the familiar clarity that had served him well in business crises. We need to reach the sanctuary. It's our only option now. The sanctuary, Ethan's voice held disbelief. That facility was decommissioned years ago. On paper, William agreed, but I maintained it through private funds after you cut the corporate support. If we can reach it, we'll be safe. Its defenses were designed specifically to keep Carson out. It's 50 miles from here, Ethan argued, through terrain crawling with Carson's men. We have no choice, William insisted. The sanctuary isn't just a hiding place. It contains research that could counteract the fertility suppressant. If the tellers were right, it might be the only hope for the Moonlight touched. Lyra, who had been tending to Ethan's leg wound, looked up sharply. A cure, you have a cure for what's killing my kind. Not yet, William admitted, but the foundation for one. Research my father began decades ago when he first discovered the declining birth rates. Ethan's expression had changed, a reluctant respect, replacing skepticism. You continued this research in secret after I shut down the official programs. I made a promise to your grandfather, William said simply. Some promises transcend corporate directives, even from my own son. For the first time in years, Ethan looked at his father without the filter of frustration and doubt that had defined their relationship since William's delusions had emerged. In that moment, he saw not a fading old man clinging to fairy tales, but a guardian maintaining a vigil that spanned generations. 50 miles, Ethan repeated, but this time it was a calculation, not an objection. We'll need transportation supplies. There's a caretaker at the sanctuary, William explained. Hannah Reynolds. If we can reach the emergency call box at the old fire tower, she can arrange extraction. The fire tower is 10 miles northeast, Ethan considered. Difficult terrain, but manageable if we avoid the roads. Sophie tugged at William's sleeve. The bad men are coming, she warned. Lots of lights moving fast. As if to confirm her warning, shouts echoed through the forest, accompanied by the crashing of underbrush as multiple teams converged on their position. We need to move. Ethan stated, struggling to his feet despite his injury. Now. William handed Sophie to Lyra, then offered his shoulder to support his son's wounded leg. Together, they slipped away from the outcropping, moving deeper into the forest as the Carson's men closed in behind them. The hunt continued, but for the first time, William felt more than just desperation driving them forward. In the unexpected alliance with his skeptical son, in the remarkable abilities of Lyra and Sophie, in the clearer understanding of what they faced, he sensed the beginning of something powerful. The Moonlight touched had been systematically eliminated for decades. Now perhaps the tide was about to turn. As they disappeared into the darkness, the prophecy echoed in William's mind once more. When the moon walks in human form, two realms will unite under winter's crown. Perhaps he thought, watching Lyra guide them with her uncanny night vision, they were witnessing that union beginning to form. Dawn broke reluctantly through the storm clouds, casting weak gray light over the exhausted fugitives. They had traveled through the night, pushing their bodies to the limit as they navigated the treacherous forest terrain. Ethan's wounded legs slowed their progress, but his military-grade training kept him moving despite the pain. William felt every one of his 70 years pressing down on him, each step a negotiation with joints that protested such abuse after decades of boardroom battles rather than physical ones. Only Lyra seemed to maintain her strength, carrying Sophie when the child could no longer walk, supporting Ethan when his leg threatened to give out somehow, finding reserves of energy that defied explanation. In the pale morning light, her alabaster skin and white hair seemed almost luminous, as if she absorbed what little sunlight penetrated the forest canopy. There, William pointed toward a metal structure rising above the trees ahead, the fire tower. The old observation platform stood like a sentinel from another era, a relic of forest management practices long since replaced by satellite monitoring and drone surveillance. Its rusted frame stretched upward, nearly 100 feet, offering both risk and sanctuary. Carson's men will be watching it, Ethan cautioned, leaning heavily against a tree trunk. His makeshift tourniquet had stemmed the worst of the bleeding, but his face was alarmingly pale. Standard search protocol covers all communication points. William nodded grimly. We don't need to reach the top. The emergency call box is at the base. If we can activate it, Hannah will know to come for us. They paused at the edge of the small clearing surrounding the tower, scanning for any sign of Carson's forces. Sophie, who had been dozing against Lyra's shoulder, suddenly became alert. 3 lights, she whispered, by the metal stairs. William marveled again at the child's ability. Can you tell if they're moving or stationed? Sophie concentrated, her young face serious beyond her years. 1 is sleeping, 2 are awake but tired. They don't see us. Ethan extracted a small pair of binoculars from his jacket pocket, studying the base of the tower. 3 guards, as she said, minimal cover between here and there. We need a distraction, William decided. Lyra gently set Sophie down, kneeling to the child's level. Stay with William and Ethan. I'm going to draw them away. Absolutely not, William protested. Carson wants you most of all. Exactly, Lyra replied with calm determination. They'll pursue me, giving you time to reach the call box. It's suicide, Ethan stated flatly. No, Lyra countered. I know these forests better than they do. I've spent my life learning to disappear. She touched Sophie's cheek gently. Keep them safe, little one. I'll find you again. Before William could object further, Lyra had slipped away, moving with surprising speed and silence through the underbrush. Within minutes, they heard shouts from the opposite side of the clearing, followed by the sound of gunfire. She's drawing them east, Ethan observed, watching through his binoculars as the guards abandoned their post to investigate. Now, William urged, supporting his son as they hurried toward the tower. Sophie stayed close, her small hand clutching William's jacket. The emergency call box was exactly where William remembered a weatherproof metal case bolted to the tower's support structure. He quickly entered the 6-digit code that had remained unchanged for 20 years, a security oversight that now worked in their favor. Inside was a satellite phone, simpler than modern technology, but more reliable in remote locations. William dialed a memorized number, holding his breath until a woman's voice answered. Sanctuary Outpost. Hannah, it's William Blackwood. Initiation Protocol Alpha. 3 for extraction, plus 1 incoming separately. There was only a momentary pause before the woman responded. Confirmed. Coordinates locked. Extraction in 20 minutes. Standard approach. Negative, William replied, eyeing the surrounding forest warily. Hot zone. Carson's team's in pursuit. Understood. Alternate extraction at the river bend, 18 minutes. The call ended with military efficiency. William returned the phone to its cradle and secured the box. The river is half a mile west, he informed Ethan. Downhill, thankfully. What about Lyra? Sophie asked, her small face pinched with worry. She knows these forests, William assured her, hoping his words carried more confidence than he felt. She'll find her way to us. They moved as quickly as Ethan's injury allowed the downhill trajectory, both helping their speed and aggravating his wounded leg. The sound of pursuit had faded, suggesting Lyra's diversion had successfully drawn Carson's men away from their position. The river came into view, a swollen, angry current charged by the previous night's storm. At a sharp bend where the water slowed marginally, they found cover among fallen logs and waited, counting down the minutes until extraction. This sanctuary, Ethan said, breaking the tense silence. What exactly does it contain? William measured his response carefully. Research facilities. Living quarters designed for the Moonlight touched. Defense systems specifically calibrated against Carson's surveillance technology. Encounter agents for the fertility suppressant. Theoretical formulations, William admitted. My father began the work when he first discovered the declining birth rates. I continued it after his death, but progress has been slow without active, Moonlight-touched participants in the research. Ethan's expression was difficult to read, a mixture of skepticism and reluctant respect. All these years, while I dismantled the programs you fought to maintain, you were continuing the work in secret. Some responsibilities transcend corporate directives, William replied simply, even those issued by my own son. Ethan looked away, his jaw tight. You should have told me the truth, shown me evidence instead of expecting blind faith. Would you have believed me? You had already decided I was a delusional old man clinging to fairy tales. The painful truth hung between them, decades of misunderstanding and missed opportunities, crystallized in a single moment of clarity. I saw what I expected to see, Ethan finally admitted. The great William Blackwood losing his grip on reality, becoming obsessed with ancient family legends. It was easier than considering the alternative, which was that you were right, that everything I'd been systematically dismantling for 5 years was actually protecting people from genocide. Ethan's voice cracked slightly, that I'd failed the family legacy in the most fundamental way possible. Before William could respond, the distinctive sound of an approaching helicopter broke through the roar of the river. Not the sleek corporate transport Ethan had arrived in, but an older model civilian craft painted matte black for low visibility. Hannah always was punctual, William observed as the helicopter descended toward a small clearing near the river bend. A woman in her 50s emerged from the craft, moving with the efficient precision of someone well-trained in emergency extractions. Her practical clothing and weather-beaten face spoke of a life spent in service rather than luxury. Mr. Blackwood, she greeted William with a quick nod before turning her attention to Ethan's wounded leg. You need medical attention. The sanctuary is 30 minutes by air. We have another person coming, William reminded her. Lyra Morgan, Moonlight touched. Hannah's eyes widened slightly. Active carrier confirmed. Healing abilities, energy manipulation. Possibly more. She created a diversion to help us reach the extraction point. Hannah spoke rapidly into a risk communicator. Team 2, we have a priority asset in the field. Deploy search pattern Gamma. She'll find her way to us, Sophie insisted, her small face determined. Her light is still bright. Hannah studied the child with open curiosity. And who might you be, young lady? Sophie Teller, William answered for her. Daughter of Alan and Mira Teller, she's shown signs of spotter abilities. Second-generation manifestation, Hannah asked sharply. That's unprecedented in recent records. Which is why Carson wants her, Ethan added, wincing as Hannah examined his leg. Her parents were researching genetic markers in the Moonlight touched. They discovered the fertility suppressant program before Carson had them killed. Hannah's professional demeanor cracked slightly. We need to move now. If Carson realizes what the child represents, he'll deploy everything he has to capture her. As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching vehicles reached them. Multiple engines moving fast along the old logging road that paralleled the river. Team 2, accelerate search pattern, Hannah commanded into her communicator. Hostile forces converging on extraction point. The helicopter pilot revved the engine, signaling readiness for immediate departure. Hannah helped Ethan board, then reached for Sophie. No, the child protested, clinging to William. We can't leave without the Moon Lady. William knelt, despite the urgency meeting Sophie's eyes. Lyra wanted us to get you to safety. We need to honor her sacrifice by making sure you reach the sanctuary. She's coming, Sophie insisted, pointing toward the dense forest across the clearing. I can see her light. William turned just as Lyra burst from the tree line, running full speed toward them. Behind her, Carson's men emerged, weapons raised. Go, Hannah shouted to William. Get the child on board. William lifted Sophie and passed her to Hannah, who was already in the helicopter. Gunfire erupted from the tree-lined bullets, striking the ground near Lyra's feet as she ran. Without hesitation, William moved toward her. 70 years fell away as adrenaline coursed through his system, pushing his body beyond its normal limitations. He reached Lyra just as she stumbled, catching her arm and pulling her toward the helicopter. They were halfway across the clearing when William felt the impact. At first, it seemed like someone had punched him hard in the back. Then came the burning sensation spreading outward from between his shoulder blades. He stumbled, but kept moving Lyra's arm around his waist, now supporting him rather than the reverse. The helicopter was only yards away. Hannah leaned out, reaching for them, her face a mask of professional urgency. Behind them, the shouts of Carson's men grew closer. Almost there, Lyra encouraged, practically dragging William the final distance. Hands reached down, pulling them into the helicopter. The craft immediately lifted, banking sharply as the pilot executed an evasive departure. Bullets pinged against the reinforced undercarriage, but none penetrated the cabin. Inside, William collapsed onto the floor, the burning in his back now a raging fire. Lyra knelt beside him, her pale hands moving to the source of his pain. He's been shot, she announced unnecessarily. The bullet is deep. Hannah produced a medical kit, her movements quick and precise. We're 28 minutes from the sanctuary's medical facilities. Can you stabilize him? Lyra's unusual eyes met William's, a silent communication passing between them. He understood what she was asking permission to reveal. Do what you need to do, he managed through gritted teeth. Lyra placed both hands directly over the wound. William felt an immediate warmth spreading from her touch, different from the burning pain of the bullet. This was energy with purpose, seeking the damage and beginning to repair it. Hannah stared in undisguised amazement as a soft glow emanated from Lyra's pale fingers. My God. Direct cellular manipulation. I've only seen records of this ability. She's healing him, Sophie explained with childlike simplicity, making the broken parts whole again. Ethan moved closer despite his own injury, watching with an expression caught between scientific fascination and dawning belief. The moonlight touched. It's real. All of it. William felt the pain receding as Lyra worked her face, a mask of intense concentration. The bullet remained lodged near his spine, but the bleeding had stopped, the damaged tissue beginning to knit itself back together. I can't remove the bullet, Lyra explained, sweat beading on her pale forehead. But I've stabilized the wound. He needs surgery when we reach your facility. Hannah nodded, her professional demeanor returning. The sanctuary has a fully equipped medical center. Dr. Morrison can handle the extraction. William struggled to sit up, Lyra supporting his shoulders. Carson will follow the helicopter. We need to implement security protocols immediately upon arrival. Already initiated, sir, Hannah assured him. The moment you called, the sanctuary went into lockdown. Carson may know it exists, but he can't breach the defenses. The helicopter soared over the dense Maine forest, putting distance between them and their pursuers. Through the window, William caught glimpses of the wilderness giving way to rocky coastline. The sanctuary occupied a remote peninsula accessible only by air or sea, its location disguised on official maps as a wildlife research station. How many staff remain, he asked Hannah. 17 full-time, down from 50 during peak operations. Her expression held a hint of reproach. Budget cuts. Not my decision, William reminded her with a pointed look at Ethan. His son had the grace to look uncomfortable. I redirected funds based on the information I had. Information that suggested the Moonlight touched were a corporate myth created to justify black budget expenditures. And now, William challenged. Ethan glanced at Lyra, who was resting against the cabin wall, clearly exhausted from her healing efforts. Then to Sophie, who sat quietly watching the sea appear on the horizon. Now I know better, he acknowledged. The question is whether it's too late to undo the damage. The helicopter began its descent toward a concrete landing pad nestled into the rocky coastline. From above, the sanctuary resembled a collection of modern research buildings and residential structures designed to blend into the natural landscape. Solar arrays and wind turbines provided independent power while desalination systems ensured water autonomy. A medical team awaited them, rushing forward with a gurney as the helicopter touched down. Dr. Lauren Morrison, the sanctuary's chief medical officer, quickly assessed William's condition. Gunshot wound partially stabilized through energy manipulation, Hannah briefed her. The bullet remains lodged near the spine. Prep for immediate surgery, Dr. Morrison ordered her team, and I want complete biometric readings on our Moonlight-touched visitor. Lyra tensed visibly at this, moving closer to Sophie in a protective gesture. No examinations without consent. William instructed firmly despite his weakened state. Ms. Morgan is a guest, not a research subject. Dr. Morrison nodded curtly. Of course, Mr. Blackwood. But if she's willing, her participation could advance our research significantly. Later, William said as they transferred him to the gurney, first we need to secure the facility and access the teller's research. Carson won't wait long to make his move. As they wheeled him toward the medical center, William caught Ethan's arm. The USB drive. Make sure it reaches the research team immediately. Already planned, his son assured him. Rest, Dad. Let us handle things for now. William wanted to protest to maintain control of the situation as he had throughout his career. But blood loss and exhaustion were taking their toll. As the medical team administered sedation in preparation for surgery, he found himself surrendering to darkness. Hours later, William awoke in a private room in the sanctuary's medical facility. The antiseptic smell and quiet beeping of monitoring equipment confirmed his location before he even opened his eyes. When he did, he found Ethan sitting beside his bed, studying data on a tablet computer. The surgery was successful, his son informed him without preamble. The bullet missed your spine by millimeters. Dr. Morrison says you were extraordinarily lucky. Not luck, William corrected, his voice rough from intubation during surgery. Lyra's intervention kept the damage contained. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. Her abilities are remarkable. The medical team has been reviewing the biometric data from your treatment. The cellular regeneration rate exceeds anything in our research models. How is she resting? The energy expenditure required for healing depleted her significantly. Sophie hasn't left her side. Ethan set down his tablet. Carson has established a perimeter approximately 3 miles offshore. 4 vessels likely armed. Drone surveillance indicates they're waiting for reinforcements. William attempted to sit up, wincing at the pain that shot through his back despite the medication. He knows we have the teller's research. He'll throw everything he has at us to prevent exposure. I've already taken precautions, Ethan assured him. The data has been uploaded to secure servers with dead man switches. If anything happens to the sanctuary, the information goes public immediately. Carson has political connections, William warned. Government contracts, military ties. Going public may not be enough. Sabi, which is why I've also transmitted the data to trusted journalists at 3 major publications with instructions to publish simultaneously if they don't receive a daily confirmation code. William couldn't help the small smile that touched his lips. Despite their differences, Ethan had inherited his strategic thinking. You've learned well. I had a good teacher, Ethan acknowledged, though I spent too many years ignoring the most important lessons. A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with unspoken reconciliation. Finally, Ethan spoke again, his tone measured. The research team has been analyzing the teller's data. Combined with our existing research, we now understand how Carson's compound affects the Moonlight touched. It targets a specific genetic sequence that regulates both fertility and energy manipulation abilities. Can it be neutralized? Potentially. The tellers were developing a counteragent before they were killed. Our team believes they can complete the formulation within weeks. William felt a weight lifting from his chest that had nothing to do with his physical injury. Then there's hope for the Moonlight touched. More than that, Ethan continued, Sophie represents something we never anticipated. Second-generation manifestation born to a carrier with recessive markers. She suggests the traits can lie dormant, then reappear in subsequent generations. Meaning the population could recover naturally once the suppressant is neutralized, William concluded. Ethan nodded. Exactly. But that's not all we discovered. He hesitated, seemingly uncertain how to continue. The tellers found evidence that Carson himself carries recessive Moonlight-touched markers. William stared at his son, processing this revelation. Carson is part Moonlight-touched. That's why he's been hunting them. Not hunting, Ethan corrected. Harvesting. The tellers discovered Carson has been experimenting with gene therapy, attempting to activate his dormant abilities artificially. He's been using captured Moonlight-touched as both research subjects and genetic donors. Dear God, William whispered, he's trying to become one of them, while simultaneously preventing new natural births through the suppressant compound. He doesn't want competition. Ethan's expression hardened. It's not just genocide, it's replacement. He wants to be the only one with these abilities. Before William could respond, an alarm sounded throughout the facility. Hannah burst into the room, her face tight with urgency. Carson's forces are making their move. Maritime approach from all sides. We have perhaps 20 minutes before they breach the outer defenses. William struggled to rise from the bed. Activate protocol Exodus. Get everyone to the emergency bunker. Hannah nodded sharply. Already initiated. But there's another problem. We detected a signal from within the sanctuary. Someone transmitted our defensive configurations to an external receiver. The traitor, Ethan realized. They followed us here. William's mind raced through possibilities. Who has access to the defense systems? Only senior staff, Hannah replied. Myself, Dr. Morrison, Security Chief Daniels, and Research Director Patel. And who knew about the fire tower extraction point? Hannah's expression darkened. All of us. It's standard protocol. Find Lyra and Sophie, William ordered. Get them to the bunker immediately. Ethan, download all research data to the secure backup site. We need to preserve the counter-agent research at all costs. As Hannah hurried from the room, William forced himself to stand, ignoring the pain radiating through his back. Ethan moved to support him. You should be resting, his son protested. Later, William dismissed. We need to identify the traitor before they compromise the bunker too. Together they made their way to the sanctuary's security center, a reinforced room filled with monitoring screens showing various sections of the facility. Security Chief Daniels, a former military man with a perpetual scowl, greeted them with a curt nod. Perimeter defense is holding for now, but they're using specialized equipment to counter our systems. I estimate 15 minutes before breach. Show me the staff locations, William requested. Daniels brought up a schematic of the facility with color-coded dots representing personnel. Most were converging on the central area where the bunker entrance was located. 2 dots moved in the opposite direction toward the research wing. Who's that? William asked, pointing to the divergent dots. Daniels checked the identification tags. Dr. Morrison and Research Director Patel. They're securing critical research materials according to protocol. Or destroying evidence, Ethan suggested grimly. William studied the monitor showing the research wing. Dr. Morrison and Patel were removing hard drives from computers and placing them in secure transport cases. Standard evacuation procedure, Daniels observed. Nothing suspicious. William wasn't convinced. Where are Lyra and Sophie? Daniels located their tags on the schematic. In the residential wing, Hannah is with them, heading toward the bunker. As they watched, Hannah's dot separated from the others, moving toward a communications node near the eastern perimeter. Why would she break away? Ethan wondered. A cold certainty settled in William's gut. She's the traitor. She's disabling the defensive systems from the inside. Daniels immediately accessed the communications logs. Confirmed, someone's bypassing security protocols at the east perimeter node. Defensive systems in sectors 5 through 8 are going offline. Lock her out, William ordered. Trying, sir, but she's using override codes. Primary administrator level. William turned to his son. Find Lyra and Sophie. Get them to the bunker. I'll deal with Hannah. You're in no condition to confront her, Ethan protested. I've known Hannah for 20 years, William replied grimly. If anyone can talk her down, it's me. Before Ethan could argue further, the facility shook with an explosion from the eastern perimeter. Carson's forces had breached the outer defenses. Go, William insisted. Protect the child and Lyra. They're what matter now. Reluctantly, Ethan nodded and departed, heading toward the residential wing at a run, despite his injured leg. William turned to Daniels. Get me to the east communication node, and I need a weapon. 5 minutes later, William approached the communication hub, a 9mm pistol. Heavy in his hand, His surgical wound protested every movement, but adrenaline kept him functioning. Through the glass door, he could see Hannah working at a control panel, methodically disabling security systems. He entered quietly, the pistol raised. "Hello, Hannah." She turned slowly, unsurprised by his presence. "William, you should be in medical. And you should be helping evacuate, not sabotaging our defenses." He kept the weapon steady despite his weakened state. Why, after all these years protecting the Moonlight touched, why betray them now? Hannah's face remained professionally impassive. "Carson has my daughter, 14 years old, showing early signs of energy sensitivity. He promised to spare her if I helped him secure the sanctuary." The revelation hit William like a physical blow. "You have a Moonlight-touched child. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I know how you operate, William. She would have become another research subject, another piece in your grand design to protect the bloodline." Bitterness edged into her voice. "I wanted her to have a normal life, not to be defined by genetic anomalies. So instead, you've given her to Carson, a man who experiments on children with these gifts." Hannah's professional mask cracked slightly. He promised she wouldn't be harmed, that she would be educated, trained to use her abilities. "He lied," William stated flatly. "The tellers discovered his true plan. He's not protecting the Moonlight touched, he's harvesting them, using their genetic material to enhance himself while preventing new births through the suppressant compound." Doubt flickered across Hannah's face. "You have no proof." "The USB drive Sophie was carrying, it contains everything the tellers discovered about Carson's operation." William slowly lowered his weapon. "Your daughter isn't being protected, Hannah. She's being exploited." Before Hannah could respond, the communication hub's door burst open. James Carson himself stood in the doorway, flanked by armed security personnel. At 58, he remained imposingly fit. His silver hair cropped short in a military style, his expensive tactical gear a stark contrast to William's hospital garments. William he greeted as if they were meeting at a corporate function rather than during an armed invasion. "You're looking remarkably well for someone who took a bullet just hours ago. The benefits of having a Moonlight-touched healer at your disposal, I presume." William kept his weapon lowered but ready. "It's over, James. The teller's research has been distributed to multiple secure locations. If anything happens to us, everything goes public." Carson smiled thinly. "A contingency I anticipated." He gestured to one of his men who brought forward a tablet. On the screen was a teenage girl clearly related to Hannah, sitting in what appeared to be a comfortable but secure room. "Which is why I maintain leverage." Hannah moved toward the screen, her composure finally breaking. "Emma? She's perfectly safe," Carson assured her. "For now, her continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation, Hannah." William watched the interaction with growing understanding. "This was your plan all along. Turn my head of security against me, using her daughter as leverage." "Business is about exploiting vulnerabilities," Carson replied with a shrug. "You taught me that, William." "Where are the child and the Moonlight-touched woman?" one of Carson's men asked Hannah. "Residential wing," she answered, avoiding William's gaze, moving toward the central bunker. Carson gestured to his team. "Secure them, alive and undamaged." As the men departed, leaving Carson with just 2 guards, William decided to play for time. "Why, James, we built Blackwood Enterprises to protect these people. You were part of that mission for decades." Carson's expression hardened. "I was part of a lie. You claimed to protect them, but you were really controlling them. Keeping them isolated, dependent on Blackwood's generosity while exploiting their abilities for corporate advantage." "That's not true," William protested. "No." Carson raised an eyebrow. "Then why keep them secluded in facilities like this? Why not integrate them into society? Because you Blackwoods wanted to maintain exclusive access to their gifts, just as I do now." The accusation struck uncomfortably close to truths William had never fully acknowledged even to himself. The Blackwood protection had indeed included elements of control of sequestration from the wider world. "Perhaps our methods weren't perfect," William conceded, "but our intentions were to keep them safe, not to harvest their genetic material for personal gain." Carson laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Always so self-righteous, William. As if intention justifies any action. The reality is that we're not so different. We both recognize the value of the Moonlight touched. I'm simply more honest about my ambitions." "Which are evolution," Carson replied simply. "Directed, controlled evolution." Why should these abilities be randomly distributed through genetic lottery? Why not harness them perfect, then direct them to those who can use them most effectively? Like yourself, William observed. Carson spread his hands in acknowledgement. I've invested billions in this research. The fertility suppressant was just phase one, eliminating the unpredictable natural occurrences, while we perfect the science of genetic activation. And once perfected, who decides who receives these gifts? You, a council of the wealthy and powerful who can afford your treatments. The market decides, Carson answered as if it were obvious, those with the vision and resources to invest in human advancement. William shook his head in disgust. Eugenics dressed up as capitalism. You're not advancing humanity, you're creating a genetic caste system with yourself at the top. Before Carson could respond, the facility's communications system crackled to life. Ethan's voice echoed through the speakers. Attention all Carson forces. This is Ethan Blackwood. We've activated the sanctuary's self-destruct sequence. You have 10 minutes to evacuate before the thermite charges reduce this facility to ash. I suggest you move quickly. Carson's expression flickered between rage and calculation. A bluff. He wouldn't sacrifice everyone inside. William smiled grimly. You underestimate my son's commitment to the cause. He's already evacuated the essential personnel and research data through the underwater access tunnels. The only ones at risk now are you and your men. And you, Carson pointed out. Some things are worth dying for, William replied simply. The future of the Moonlight touched is one of them. Uncertainty crept into Carson's eyes as the facility's emergency lights began pulsing red, accompanied by an automated voice announcing evacuation procedures. 8 minutes to self-destruct. All personnel proceed to emergency exits. Carson gestured sharply to his remaining guards. Find Blackwood's son. Determine if this is real or a bluff. As the men departed, Carson turned back to William, his composed facade cracking. This accomplishes nothing, William. I have research facilities around the world continuing this work. Destroying one location only delays the inevitable. Perhaps, William acknowledged, but it gives the Moonlight touch time. Time to understand what you've done to them, time to develop countermeasures. Carson's hand moved to his sidearm. Always the idealist even at 70. That's why you'll die here while I'll adapt and continue. You're not taking the child or Lyra, William stated with quiet certainty, even if it costs my life. Such dramatic self-sacrifice, Carson mocked, and entirely unnecessary. He raised his weapon, aiming not at William but at Hannah. Tell me where they've really gone, or your head of security dies now. William maintained his calm exterior, though his heart raced. You'd kill the mother of a Moonlight-touched child. How would you explain that to Emma? Carson's smile was cold. Children are remarkably adaptable, especially with the right conditioning. The standoff was interrupted by a new voice from the doorway. Put the gun down, Carson. Ethan stood there, his own weapon trained steadily on Carson's head. Beside him was Lyra, her pale skin almost luminescent with what appeared to be gathered energy, and Sophie, her small face set in an expression far too serious for her years. The self-destruct was a bluff, Carson realized. Not entirely, Ethan corrected. The charges are real, the timer is real, but we control the detonation. William felt a surge of pride in his son's strategic thinking. It's over, James. Your men are evacuating as we speak, believing the facility is about to explode. You're alone. Never alone, Carson replied with disturbing confidence, and never without options. What happened next occurred so quickly, William could barely track the sequence of events. Carson lunged toward Sophie, clearly intending to use her as a hostage. Lyra moved with inhuman speed, placing herself between Carson and the child. Hannah, in a moment of maternal recognition, threw herself at Carson from behind. The gunshot was deafening in the confined space. Hannah crumpled to the floor, blood blossoming from a wound in her chest where Carson's bullet had struck her. Lyra immediately dropped to her knees beside the injured woman, pale hands moving to the wound as they had done for William. Carson used the distraction to grab Sophie, pressing his weapon to the child's head. Nobody moves or the girl dies. Ethan kept his weapon trained on Carson, his expression torn between rage and calculation. William weakened by his injury, and the confrontation leaned heavily against the communication console. You won't kill her, William said with more confidence than he felt. She's too valuable to your research. I don't need her alive, Carson countered coldly. Just her genetic material. The ruthless calculation in his voice confirmed William's worst fears about how far his former partner had fallen. This was no longer about business rivalry or scientific disagreement. This was a fundamental battle for the future of human evolution. Sophie, however, seemed strangely calm, despite the gun at her head. Her small face was concentrated, as if listening to something only she could hear. "Your light is broken," she said to Carson, her voice childlike yet unsettlingly perceptive. "It's all twisted up inside you." Carson's expression flickered with momentary uncertainty. "Shut up. I can see where they put the other lights inside you," Sophie continued, her eyes taking on an almost luminous quality. "They don't belong there. They're hurting you." William realized with sudden clarity what Sophie was seeing. Carson's gene therapy experiments on himself using genetic material from captured Moonlight touched. "It's killing you, isn't it, James?" William asked quietly. "The artificial activation process. Your body is rejecting it." Carson's hand trembled slightly, the first crack in his composed facade. "Temporary side effects. The next generation of treatments will stabilize the process." "There won't be a next generation," Ethan stated flatly. "Your research ends today." Carson's laugh held an edge of desperation. "You still don't understand. This is bigger than me, bigger than Blackwood. Governments around the world are pursuing similar research. The ability to enhance human capabilities through genetic manipulation is the next arms race. And you positioned yourself to profit from it," William concluded, "selling to the highest bidder while eliminating the natural competition." During this exchange, something subtle was happening. Sophie, still held hostage, had placed her small hand against Carson's wrist. Where their skin touched, a faint glow was building, similar to Lyra's healing energy, but somehow different. Carson suddenly gasped, his grip on Sophie loosening. "What are you doing to me?" The child's voice remained calm. "Fixing the broken parts, the parts that don't belong to you." William watched in astonishment as Carson staggered backward, releasing Sophie entirely. His skin had taken on an ashen quality, and he clutched at his chest as if in pain. "She's neutralizing the artificial gene therapies," Lyra realized, looking up from where she continued to treat Hannah. "Rejecting the stolen energy signatures." Carson collapsed to his knees, his weapon clattering to the floor. Ethan immediately kicked it away, maintaining his aim at the fallen man. "What have you done to me?" Carson demanded, his voice ragged. "Only what you did to yourself," Sophie answered with the simple wisdom of childhood. The lights wanted to go home. William moved to Sophie, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "It's over, James. Your experimentation, your suppression of the Moonlight, touched, all of it ends today." Carson looked up, and his face contorted with a mixture of pain and defiance. "You think this changes anything? The research exists. The compound is already deployed worldwide. One setback doesn't undo decades of work." "No," William agreed, "but it gives us time to implement the counteragent the tellers were developing. Time to help the Moonlight touched recover their population. Time to prepare them for the world that wanted to exploit them." As if to punctuate his words, Hannah gasped and sat up. Lyra's healing, having repaired the worst of her gunshot wound. Her eyes immediately sought Carson, narrowing with maternal fury. "Where is my daughter?" she demanded. Carson's laugh was hollow. "Safe for now, and still my insurance policy." William exchanged a glance with Ethan, a silent communication passing between father and son. "Not anymore," Ethan stated, producing a satellite phone. "While you were focused on invading the sanctuary, I dispatched a team to your primary research facility in Vermont. Emma Reynolds has been recovered along with 6 other Moonlight-touched children you were holding." For the first time, genuine shock registered on Carson's face. "Impossible. That facility is impenetrable." "Nothing is impenetrable to someone with your security clearances," Ethan replied, "which your former head of cybersecurity was happy to provide in exchange for immunity." The final piece of Carson's composure cracked. Without his hostage, without his leverage, without even his artificially acquired abilities, he was simply a man facing the consequences of decades of unethical actions. As Ethan's security team arrived to take Carson into custody, William felt the weight of years pressing down on him once more. The adrenaline that had sustained him was fading, bringing with it the pain of his barely healed wound. Lyra appeared at his side, offering silent support. You need rest, she observed. The healing is still incomplete. William nodded wearily. Soon. There's one more thing we need to do first. 20 minutes later, they gathered in the sanctuary's main research lab. The teller's data had been fully integrated with the Blackwood research, creating a comprehensive picture of both the suppressant compound and potential counteragents. The distribution will take time, Research Director Patel explained, gesturing to the projected models on the screen. But introducing the counteragent through the same water supply systems Carson used should neutralize the suppressant within months. And the fertility effects, William asked. Reversible in approximately 60% of affected individuals, Patel replied. The younger the subject, the better the recovery prognosis. William absorbed this information with mixed emotions. More than half could recover, could potentially have children who might carry the Moonlight-touched genes. But many would remain permanently affected by Carson's actions. We'll need to locate all surviving Moonlight-touched, he decided. Offer them sanctuary and treatment. And then what? Lyra asked quietly. Keep them isolated here, protected, but separate. The question cut to the heart of William's decades-long mission. Had the Blackwood protection been just another form of control, as Carson had suggested? No, William decided. That era ends today. Protection without integration has failed them. Failed you. He looked from Lyra to Sophie, then to the others gathered in the lab. The Moonlight touch deserved to live in the world, not apart from it. The world may not be ready for them, Morrison cautioned. Then we make it ready, Ethan interjected firmly. Blackwood Enterprises has resources, influence, political connections. We've spent generations hiding these people. Now we use that same power to create a place for them in society. William felt a profound sense of completion as he listened to his son articulate this new vision. The prophecy echoed in his mind once more. When the moon walks in human form, two realms will unite under winter's crown. Perhaps the prophecy had never been about Lyra alone, but about this moment of transformation. The uniting of the Moonlight touched with the wider world. The winter crown, not a symbol of power, but of protection through the coldest seasons until spring brought new growth. It won't be easy, he acknowledged. Carson was right about one thing. Governments and corporations will seek to exploit these abilities once they're confirmed to exist. Then we'll be ready, Ethan promised. A new kind of sanctuary, not walls to keep them in, but shields to keep exploitation out. William looked at Lyra, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this discussion. What do you think it's your future we're planning? Her unusual eyes held his, luminous with an inner light that seemed to have grown stronger since they first met. I think it's time for people like me to step out of shadows and fairy tales, to be seen for what we are, not cursed, not blessed, just different in ways that can benefit humanity if used with wisdom. She turned to Sophie, who stood beside her, small hand tucked trustingly in Lyra's pale one. And I think this little one deserves to grow up knowing both her heritage and her potential without fear or isolation. William nodded, feeling a weight lifting from his shoulders that had nothing to do with physical pain. For 3 generations, the Blackwoods had protected the Moonlight touch through secrecy and separation. Now a new chapter would begin, one of integration and open protection. As they left the research lab, heading toward the medical center, where William could finally get the rest his body demanded, he found himself walking between his son and Lyra, with Sophie skipping ahead of them. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. The past, the present, and 2 possible futures moving forward together. When the moon walks in human form, 2 realms will unite under winter's crown, he murmured. Lyra glanced at him curiously. The prophecy you mentioned, what does it mean? William smiled, watching Sophie's innocent joy as she explored the corridor ahead. I think it means exactly what we're doing now, bringing together what should never have been separated. 1 year later, William stood at the window of the rebuilt sanctuary, watching as children played in the gardens below. Some with alabaster skin and white hair, others appearing entirely ordinary, yet all carrying the genetic markers of the Moonlight touched in various expressions. The teller's counteragent had been successfully distributed worldwide, neutralizing Carson's suppressant compound. New cases of Moonlight touch births had already been documented in regions where they had disappeared for generations. Carson himself remained in custody, his corporate empire dismantled, his research confiscated. The legal battles would continue for years, but the immediate threat had been neutralized. Ethan had transformed Blackwood Enterprises, refocusing its considerable resources on both protecting and integrating the Moonlight touched into society. Educational programs, medical research, legal protections, all aimed at creating a world where difference was valued rather than feared or exploited. And Lyra had become the bridge between worlds, working with both Moonlight-touched individuals and the scientific community to better understand their unique abilities. No longer hiding in a cottage at the edge of a hostile village, she had emerged as a leader, her healing gifts now openly shared with those in need. "Penny for your thoughts," Ethan said, joining his father at the window. William smiled, feeling the contentment of a man who has seen his life's mission transformed and renewed rather than simply completed. "I was thinking about your grandfather," he replied, "about how he started all this to protect one woman he loved, never imagining it would grow into this." Below, Sophie was teaching younger children a game, her confident movements belying the trauma she had endured a year earlier. Hannah stood nearby, reunited with her daughter Emma, both now openly embracing their heritage. "Do you think he would approve of the new direction?" Ethan asked. William considered this for a moment. "I think he would say we're honoring his original intent, if not his methods. Protection through empowerment rather than isolation." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "The winter crown protects until spring arrives." "Exactly," William agreed, pleased by his son's understanding. "And spring, it seems, has finally come for the Moonlight touched." As they watched the scene below, Lyra looked up, somehow sensing their attention. She waved the afternoon sunlight, catching her white hair and pale skin, no longer features to be hidden, but proud markers of her unique heritage. William waved back, marveling at how a chance encounter during a storm had changed everything. Not just for himself or for Blackwood Enterprises, but for an entire people who had been systematically eliminated over decades. "When the moon walks in human form, two realms will unite under winter's crown," he murmured once more. "Not an ending, but a beginning. Not a conclusion, but a transformation. The Moonlight legacy would continue, but now in the light rather than the shadows." And for William Blackwood, former guardian of an empire, there was no greater gift than witnessing this new dawn.